Okay, part 3 of Extermination of the Joyas. Alright, let's go. Estefana, however, was a fighter from a long line of survivors. Her father, uh, Fructuoso Jose Cholam, had served as a mission alcalde prior to secularization, which was a kind of overseer or boss. With his wife, Hygienia White Fructuoso received a small parcel of land during secularization in 1835, one of the very few Indians given this opportunity. Fructuoso lived on this land until his death in 1845, when Victor was about a year old. By 1850, Haeckel states his widow may have joined on the land by her daughter Estefana, and presumably her surviving underage children, including Victor, who would have been 4 years old. Some of the land was sold to Joaquin Gonzalez, an, immig- an emigrant from Chile who had been a soldier at the Presidio in Monterrey. The contract carried the agreement that Hygienia and Estefana, and presumably any of her surviving underage children could continue to live on the land until Hygienia's death. By 1853, when Victor was 7, Hygienia had sold the remainder of her husband's rancho to Gonzalez. And around the same time, Estefana married the Chilean, like several other Indian women who, uh, like several other Indian women who only married to a non-Indian, secured what was left of Estefana's inheritance. It is possible for me to imagine a little of Victor Aceto's life, born into a post-Holocaust Indian world, living in poverty. Post-Holocaust, yeah, true. So this is where the overlap of the language would be, I guess. It seems pretty common. This is written in 2010, and this scenario, like describing it in this scenario, this would predate that specific genocide. But anyways, I just I like to sort of catch an analysis when I can see one while I'm reading this. I don't want to take forever reading this, but All right. Where was I? Living in poverty, illegitimate in the church's eyes, he grew up with his strong Indian grandmother Hygienia, her two powerful daughters, Josepha, aka Chepa, and Theodosia, his aunt, as his aunts, on a small chunk of his indigenous land secured for him by his mother's marriage to a former soldier at the former mission. No wonder Isabel told Harrington that old women were Jotaras, meaning, I suspect, tough broads. Now that I know more about Estefana, I can see how Isabel used the word as a sign of her admiration, as a way to praise those Veyaja entes, uh, end quote. Those old women before us, troublemakers who never stopped fighting, never stopped loving, never stopped trying to survive, and never gave up their identity or their relationships with their homeland. Yeah, part of genocide, I think, is also like you don't even have to necessarily kill people. I know this is just common knowledge. It's just ruin people's lives. Again, like in slavery, you just break up families. You make people think they're settled in a large family and then it's just like, oh, you have a kid now, and time to take it away, I guess. Well, actually, no. In slave breeding, they actually gave you time to create the bond before you separate. So it's even more sickening, actually. Uh, alright. Of course, Estefana, quote, never said nothing, end quote, about her son's sexual choices. First, her father's position as alcalde indicates that uh, Pre-missionization, his family was probably already in a position of authority. Inherited family status often replicated itself within the mission, with formerly high status families gravitating toward whatever new positions of authority were available to Indians. These same high status families also retained much of the traditional knowledge, language, and cultural information, in part because they were more able to protect themselves and preserve the individuals possessing this information. Fructuoso came from a time when knowledge of Joyas by any name was common, when men of high status sought out Joyas as wives because of their reputations as hard workers, when to be a Joya was a position of high status in and of itself, no matter what status the Joya's family of origin. Fructuoso would have taught his daughters this, as well as much more about their indigenous culture, while striving to reinvent that culture in a world of undergoing the worst devastation imaginable. Second, it is clear that everyone involved in her story, from Isabel and storyteller to the three real sisters, Victor and even Harrington, who, after all, went back to Isabel a year later for clarification, all understood that the word Jodo was not a compliment. The infliction of homophobia is a result of earlier gendercide on California Indians who deeply fixed well before Isabel's comments and was no doubt something Victor himself was forced to deal with all his life. Except for a brief mention in another Harrington Field note from May 1936, in which Isabel recalls Victor Aceto working as a cook for a man named Snively. I don't know what happened to Victor. Records from 1850 to 1900 are scarce for Indian people, especially with the Catholic missions in limbo between Spain, Mexico, and the United States, and especially for someone who would not show up on church registers as a groom or father. This short note is all we know about him. His name, his mother's resistant behavior, his sexual orientation, the implication that for a woman to be strong implied a mixture of masculine and feminine energy. But Victor's presence gives me hope. Hearing via Isabel that he grew up to adulthood and knowing who his mother was allows me to imagine him as having, at the very least, a sense of self complicated not just by shame but by knowledge of his historical and cultural inheritance. Uh, Sorry guys, hold on. As the sexual side of the spiritual sexual splitting of the Joyas role, Jotos, like Victor, survived quietly and at great cost, but they survived. Reemergence of Joyas as two-spirited peoples. Looking forward now, it is clear to me that indigenous California third gender people are reemerging from attempted genocide, which we survived by performing a division between spiritual and sexual roles in our community. We are reemerging as contemporary two-spirit people. This name, two-spirit, allows the reunion of spiritual and sexual roles into a whole and undivided by gender role, a role still needed in human society. Claiming our roles as the caretakers of culture and spirituality, like Fernando Limbrado, as well as our sexual selves, like Victor Aceto, we focused our attention on the nurturance of our communities. One contemporary example of the two-spirit is L. Frank Manriquez, a Tongva Ajakanman artist and tribal activist. She is a board member of the California Indian Basket Weavers Association, the advocates of Indigenous California language survival and the Native California Network organizations involved in the preservation and revival of Native Californian cultures through conferences, workshops, traditional art practices, and language immersion camps, as well as chronicling collections of native Californian art. Manriquez is also a respected artist in several genres drawing, painting, soapstone carving, and basket weaving. Her book of drawings, Acorn Soup, earned her the title of the Indian Gary Larson, end quote, and co-edited she was co-editor of First Families, a photographic history of Californian Indians, widely regarded as a powerful testimony to the continuation of California Indian culture. I believe that what Manriquez has been doing is deeply traditional and part of the re-emerging of Joya or two-spirit renaissance as a person with the energy of two genders balancing within her, and conscious of the value of her work with the dead to nurture the living. Manriquez performs the ancient role of undertaker as so many specially trained indigenous people have done before her, but she is doing it without that careful training and so must find her own way. Quote, because our people are considered extinct, it's hard to get information, end quote, Manrica writes and goes on to say. So there's really nobody you can go to except for your dreams and your prayers and your wishes and your longings. Oh, that's expected but really sad. Okay. Okay, end quote. Uh, in 2001, Manriquez wrote that she had felt compelled to travel to museums outside the United States where the artifacts from California Indian tribes had been taken, led by her dreams, and a timely award from the Fund for Folk Culture. Manriquez visited the Musée de la Home, where, quote, I walked into this room where there were boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of my people's lives, and they were like muffled crying coming from these shelves and these boxes, and it was just heartbreaking. But these pieces and I became friends. I tried to touch as much as I possibly could, end quote. Damn, when you go to these places, like at a museum, you're not even allowed to touch them. But, like, getting just the connection because it's your family heritage, like, it's not the same as just like, whoa, that's cool, man, and just tourists coming to, like, touch everything. Man, that's really sad. What the hell? Okay. Um, okay. For California Indians, as for many indigenous peoples, touching artifacts stolen from native communities has connotations both deeply spiritual and terribly dangerous. Quote, there was a piece that really worried me when I photographed it, end quote. Manriquez says, and goes on to say, it has a display in the Musée de la Home, and it said specifically, grave item, end quote. Knowing that the contact with the dead or objects buried with the dead was a hazardous spiritual act that could affect her well-being and balance, Maniquez was torn between the desire to reclaim what little was left of her culture, and a duty to follow traditional prohibitions set in place long before the culture became endangered. Ultimately, she decided, quote, well, I may burn in Indian hell, but this is really important to me to see this, for me and my people, end quote. I honestly think they would understand because, I mean, they should know you're not just anyone doing this. So, I don't think, I don't think, unless it's just an indiscriminatory mindset of physics toward, in like the spirit mind, where it's like you move a stone and something happens. They don't, it might not be like a continuation of a thought process, but I would think, you know, I would really think that they would understand compared to just some normie who's just like, ooh, touching everything, ooh, you know? Okay. Later, showing slides of this and other burial items in a group that included the Kahula elder Catherine Sabel Maniquez was again unsure about her choice, this time for reasons of community disapproval. Quote, I was incredibly worried because here's a grave item and I'm dealing with it, but Catherine looked at me and she understood what I was saying and what I was doing to bring it back and showing people. And so I could carry on other traditions without fear of losing term reprisal, long term reprisal. Unmarried and without children, Manriquez has said that her work is her legacy, reclaiming indigenous knowledge and passing it on to coming generations. She acknowledges that reclaiming work is spiritually risky. Quote, there aren't many of us who will endure museums because sometimes there are things in there that you should not touch, you should not see, you should not be near, and so we risk a lot going to recover, end quote. If it's like a curse aspect, just generalizing, so to speak, I guess if that's how they feel, I guess I can't question them if they're actually worried, even for their own culture, their cultural spirits might backlash at them or whatever. I guess I can't question that. Okay. I do not believe it is a coincidence that Maniquez also identifies as a woman whose primary sexual and emotional relationship are with other women. Uh, whose primary sexual and yeah, to deal with the powerful energy of the dead, she must also be able to draw on the creative energy inherent in sexual existence. When asked if I could include her two-spirit identity in this discussion, Maniquez replied, quote, I have no problem doing it out there, end quote, indicating that it is much a part of her work as any research or artwork. Many other two-spirit Indians currently serve the recovery of their indigenous community via the spiritual and cultural arts of poetry, fiction, and visual arts, basket weaving, tribal leadership, and environmental activism. These people also assert and live their sexual identities as what Euro Americans call queer. In fact, Janice Gold, Concow, has described the work that indigenous woman poets like Chaistos, Mena Mane, Joy Harjo, Mivshok, and Beth Brant, Mohawk, do in grieving, honoring, and writing our historical losses in terms of a, quote, resurrection of history through writing. This writing, I would say, amounts almost to an act of exhumation, end quote. A statement that reinforces the necessity of the two-spirit involvement in survival of native culture and communities. Reconstructing a spiritual community oriented role for two spirit people. In conclusion, I suggest that contemporary California two spirits are the rightful descendants of Joyas. Two spirit people did not cease to exist, they did not cease to be born simply because the Spaniards killed our Joya ancestors. This is, in fact, a crucial point. The word gay or lesbian do not fully define a two-spirit person because those labels are based on an almost exclusively sexual paradigm inherited from a non-indigenous colonizer culture. The Chumash, Akwi, or Joyas fulfilled important roles as spiritual community leaders. So although genocide and gendercide work to erase their bodies, neither their spirits nor the indigenous community's spiritual needs could be murdered. This is what comes down to us as two-spirit people, the necessity of our roles as keepers of a dual or blended gender that molds male and female energy in various mixtures and keeps the world balanced. Okay, so my friend used to talk about a balance. I don't know if I talked about this already, but yeah, sacred male, sacred female, but the fact that you need somebody in the middle of that to handle it, I feel like that's an emergent property that You can say it's both, but once in it's an emergent property, like a total mixing and a different energy that gets to emanate from the emergent property, it isn't just masculine and female, you know? Anyways. Oh, well, I mean, they seem to see it as that, so I can't question it. Again, it's just, I would think it would be a totally different gender emergent property. Alright, I totally forgot where I was. The Chumash, Akwi, or Joyas fulfilled important roles as spiritual community leaders so although genocide and gendercide work to erase their bodies, neither, oh, yeah, the practices, spiritual needs, okay, I think I read that. This is what comes down to us as two-spirit people, the necessity of our roles as keepers of a dual or blended gender that molds in various mixtures and holds. Yeah, okay. Although I keep forgetting where I was. I'm sorry, guys. I keep wanting to like explain a thing, then I forget where I am. All right. Although two-spirit people often had children in the past and continue to do so in the present and will in the future, we do not expect or train our children to follow in our footsteps. A two-spirit person is born regardless of biological genealogy. Thus, we will always be with you. We are you. We are not outsiders. Some other communities that can be wiped out. We come from you and we return to you. Simply identifying as both Indian and gay does not make a person two-spirit, although it can be a courageous and important step. The danger of that assumption elides two-spirit responsibilities as well as the social and cultural needs of contemporary indigenous communities in relation to such issues as suicide rates, alcoholism, homelessness, and AIDS. What steps can we take to reconstruct our role in the larger indigenous community? I look back at this research on my family and find guidance, examples, strategies, and lessons that converge around 6 key factors. 1. Reclaim a name for ourselves. 2. Reclaim a place for ourselves within our tribal communities, which means serious education and presents to counteract centuries of homophobia, a literary presence, a practical presence, and a working presence. 3. Resist violence against ourselves as individuals and as a community within Native America. Oh, sorry about that. What is it? 4. Work to undermine what our roles as limited beings might be in contemporary Native and national contexts. 5. Work to reclaim our histories from the colonizer records, even as we continue to know and adapt our lives to contemporary circumstances and needs. And 6. Create loving, supportive, celebratory community that can work to heal the wounds inflicted by shame, internalized hatred, and fear, dealing with the legacy that, as the Chickasaw poet Linda Hogan says, quote, history is our illness. With the adoption of the name Two-Spirit, we have already begun the work of our lifetimes. As Sue Ellen Jacobs, Wesley Thomas, and Sabine Lang writes, quote, using the word Two-Spirit emphasizes the spiritual aspect of one's life and downplays the homosexual persona, end quote. Significantly, this move announces and enhances the two-spirit need for traditionally centered lives, with the community's well-being at the center. Still, we face great problems: the lack of knowledge or spiritual training for GLBTQ native people, particularly the mystery of blending spiritual and sexual energies to manage death/rebirth. In traditional times, there would have been older Joyas to guide experienced ones. There would have been ceremony, role modeling, community support, and most importantly, there would have been a clear role waiting to be filled. The name Two-Spirit, then, is a way to alert others and remind ourselves that we have a cultural and historical responsibility to a larger community. Our work is to attend to a balance of energies. We are still learning what this means. There has been no one to teach us but ourselves, our research, our stories, and our hearts. Maybe this will be the generation to figure it out. Maybe this will be the generation to really claim our inheritance within our communities, and if it is not, I take heart from the history of the Joyas, the impossibility of their true genocide, and the deep, passionate mutual need for relationship between two spirit and our communities. Notes. Oh, is that the end of that? Am I heading just into note territory? Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, wait. Sorry about that, guys. I'm just checking because I don't want to miss out on like anything. And um, all right, guys. Actually, I will do something for you guys if it's convenient. I will leave the notes on the screen so you can gather that if you wish to. All right. Sorry. All right. I know this is gonna take a while. If you guys are having trouble. Oh, sorry about that. Tablet fell. All right. I do think the notes are sometimes important for people, so this is why I'm like doing this. There's also extra stuff, I guess, in the notes, but I don't know how much different it would be and unpack what I was already reading. Like that would be interesting. It's more suggestions upon where to unpack what I was just reading, but yeah. All right. Almost done, guys. I'm sorry this is taking a while. Again, doing this just in case someone cares about the notes. Um, I guess I could just keep the. No, I don't think that would work, actually. Alright. Well, you saw where I initially happened upon the. Oh, shit. No, you didn't. I'm just ranting to myself at this point. Alright. Alright. That's cool. Alright, guys. I will see you in the next one.